The arcade racing scene of the 2000s is often depicted as a golden age, where simulating the function of a car or bike wasn't the biggest concern of a car-crazed child with a PS2 controller. Of course, that's not to say that we didn't have different flavors of racing games back then. The likes of Gran Turismo and Live for Speed fulfilled that desire to drive unaffordable cars with as much realism as possible. As for me, I was in the arcade bracket. My bread and butter were games such as Need for Speed, Burnout, Midnight Club, but there were other series I had also known about but never had the opportunity to try. Until now, that is. And one of those games is Flatout, which delves you into the realm of derby racing. You take the concept of rally car racing from snowy regions to deep forests and country towns and remove the concern of the car's body and condition. You take the rowdy bar fight scenario and turn that into a race somehow. That is derby racing in a nutshell. Off-road racing for dirty drivers who have zero fucks to give about the bumpers or the paint job of the car. Flatout is a racing game that acts as a love letter to that style of racing. In 2004, Bugbear Entertainment and Empire Interactive would release the first Flatout, which combined derby racing with arcade racing gameplay, where you drive recklessly without any consequences or penalties. No black flags on the track, no penalties, no pit stops, no bullshit, just a straight up Wreckfest. Oh, and also, no story either. You just get your shitbox of a car and start racing in the career mode, which consists of exactly 36 races, divided up between 3 different classes, bronze, silver, and gold, each representing the power and handling of their respective cars. The bronze stage is more or less an introduction, so to speak. You could start off with any car and get straight into the tracks. Upon first glance, you'll notice a number of different things. For starters, the graphical detail on the cars is quite impressive. They are modeled quite nicely and follow a consistent pattern, consisting of sedans, hatchbacks, and muscle cars. So anyone looking to derby a Ferrari or a Lamborghini will be disappointed here. Handling is a mix between being somewhat satisfying but also somewhat how you going. Making turns is relatively easy, but you won't feel that sense of speed for a while, at least not until you start investing in upgrades. Speaking of which, your car can be tuned up, from the engine to the drivetrain, the exhaust, the tires, the body, suspension, etc. To unlock the more advanced parts, however, you need to buy the pre-existing parts that are available to buy. So for each class, you will need to prioritize which parts are more important to you for the races ahead. Personally, I favored speed more, so I invested more on the engine, where I could get more speed out of the car. Handling wasn't that much of a concern, because all the cars have a tendency to drift anyway on the tracks themselves, so it becomes more of a case of knowing the layout of the track, knowing the secret shortcuts, and using those opportunities to get ahead, or get closer if you've been crashing too much. The damage model in the first Flatout is incredible. You could tell that the team had agonized over this part of the game, since damaging other cars and driving recklessly is the crux of this game. It is what gives Flatout its own identity, compared to all the others. The amount of debris flying from every end of the car to your opponents, and of course your surrounding environments, with their carefully placed objects, gives a sandbox feel to each track. In every other racing game, you're conditioned to avoid hazards or other cars, because it can hold you back. In Flatout, it's part of the fun, deliberately smashing other opponents against the wall to have them flying out, ramming their side only to flip their car over, whilst the other opponents get caught up in the wanton destruction that you've just caused in a split second. That's where the game's strengths come from, and it's what distinguishes it from the other races of its era. You have a choice of a few colours upon your selection of a car, but it's somewhat limited, and given that there's a limited number of races for each class, you have to commit to your chosen car. Decide which parts you need more, so that you can get through the races and move on to the next class with enough money for a car and a few upgrades. The tracks themselves often repeat the same locations, from a local country town to a dig site, a snowy area, a forest, a racetrack, and a farming region. But the tracks themselves often have enough variety that it does catch you off guard in the initial stage. But once you identify all the hazards and what not to crash into, then it becomes a matter of driving ability and concentration. The crashing aspect has more benefits than just simply slowing your opponents down. You are given nitro by default, which acts as a booster, which can only be refilled by smashing into other cars or smashing into objects. The bigger the crash, the more nitro you obtain. The cars themselves though are pretty balanced in terms of acceleration and top speed, so most of the time you won't be overlapping or gaining long distances, unless you're driving a fully upgraded Blade in the Gold stage. That car is insanely fast once it's fully upgraded. The physics are another highlight of the game, from the crashes of the cars to the animations of the drivers as they are skyrocketed out of the window after a serious crash. It has that nice early ragdoll feel to it. The two models that you select, male or female, function the same, so it's just a matter of preference. They all ragdoll just the same. And you can do the same thing to your opponents as well. If you can rear them towards a wall or a heavy object, then a serious crash will happen on their part. There is also a reset button for if you crash that you can use in a dire situation where you risk losing the lead, or you risk the distance that you've gained towards your opponent. But I'd say that once you're in the lead, clean racing becomes a priority, unless your goal is to rack up as much cash as possible by destroying property, which is recorded after a race is finished. Money is manageable for the most part. The first two classes, I didn't feel like I needed to upgrade too much unless it was absolutely necessary, and even then, all I had to do was drive a little better if I was struggling to keep up, or if I just happened to crash too often. Difficulty-wise, the game is fairly easy, I'd say. It does have its frustrating moments, but so does every other racing game. Also, the career mode itself is rather short. If you commit a day to completing it fully, it'll be done in no time. The soundtrack is a mixture of rock tracks from several 2000s bands. It's really catchy and fits the off-road derby vibe that Bugbear were going for in this game. Of course, this is a matter of being subjective, because while it fits the game, it may not suit you, and you may just decide to play your own music. Personally, I would have felt that a bit more variety in the genre selection would have been nice. Some of my favourite racing games of all time have had a huge assortment of tracks that benefited greatly from genre variety really. But I can look past it, since this was a studio that had to work with the budget that they put forth for this game, and licensing for music can be an expensive affair, which is why most people will often hire a composer to make a soundtrack for them, rather than just getting permission from several artists. This game, depending on your mindset, can sometimes be frustrating. Its inconsistent handling and tendency to drift can often lead you into unfortunate situations, and before you know it, your car flips on the final lap, or it takes an eternity for that reset button to arrive after you've flown out of the window, and other cars are passing you by. Hitting certain objects like wooden fences and barrels slow your car like you wouldn't believe. It can be really annoying at times, just as much as it can be fun. I'm not the biggest fan of its handling style, but the damage modeling and the car physics when crashing more than make up for it, making Flatout at the end of the day a pretty fun early 2000s racing experience. Officially, the multiplayer itself is dead, but you do however have people online that are dedicated to keeping this game alive by unofficial means. Personally, I haven't tried it yet, but you can use third-party software like Game Ranger to see if you can find some of them. Otherwise, seek out the Flatout communities on Reddit or Discord for more information on the matter. Now, when the career mode is finished, by completing all three classes in their respective order, you then have the other modes like Quick Race, where you can do single races upon your desired track, or do a time attack mode where you go for the fastest lap time. Other than that, you have the bonus mode, which is a selection of different activities that you can strive for to obtain the highest scores, and where you can use the ragdoll physics to its fullest. You even have a demolition derby mode, where you can crash to your heart's content. I haven't played all of the modes yet, but I'd rather not spoil it too much here. I think it is something for new players to discover fully by themselves without it getting spoiled too much, but I will say that there is a lot of fun to be had here, and if you're someone that wants to set records, then you'll find a lot of Flatout players spend a lot of time doing the same thing here as well. The first Flatout was a game that offered something different, while still having that classic arcade feel that a lot of racing fans from the 90s and 2000s enjoy. It was also a product of a time where racing games didn't need to become a jack of all trades like they do nowadays. It just offered a simple career mode with no story to hold it back, where you could just enjoy the game's decent handling, but amazing sense of destruction and car physics, decent graphics, a decent soundtrack, and a nice variety of racetracks, modes, and cars to enjoy. But in retrospect, it does feel more like a proof of concept, at least when you compare it to its sequel, Flatout 2, which has been put on a pedestal to being the best game in the series, and part of the so-called golden age of racing games. Even if you're not an off-road fan, or a derby fan for that matter, I think you'll still find some mindless fun within this game. and it is a great starting point if you want to see what the early 2000s had to offer in the realm of racing. Thank you for watching.